Okay.
We'll call this meeting order. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
United States of America,
and to the republic
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
liberty and justice for all.
They're about 2 seconds behind.
All right. Reading of the call.
Dear Supervisor, please be advised that the Trumpealeau County Board of Supervisors will meet at 7 p.m. on March 15th, 2021, in the County Board Room. All County Board members' claims are due in the County Clerk's office by noon on March 5th, 2021, so they can be prepared for Audit Committee approval. Sincerely, Paul Severson, County Clerk.
Roll call.
Rick Nimitz. Douglas Winters.
Aye.
Sally Miller. Richard Seisha.
Yes.
Joe Feltes. George Brandt.
Here.
Beth Killian.
Here.
Randy Tollefson.
Here.
Michelle Haynes.
Here.
John Austin.
Here.
Chuck Wallach. Tim Zeglin.
Present.
Dan Schreiner.
Here.
Mike Nelson. Oh, Mike, how you didn't change this one? Kellen Nelson. Ooh, we've got some that we haven't switched over. Jeannie Nutter.
Here.
Kurt Skoyan.
Here.
Ron Johnson.
Here.
15 and 2.
Anyone joined yet?
Nope, I don't see a Sally yet.
Just texted her to make sure she's not having trouble
Okay.
again, so.
Certify the open meeting law requirements been met. Proper posting and notification. We have 11 item agenda. The only thing I know for sure that item 5D, Human Services Annual Report, is going to be postponed for 1 month. And also the LEPC, Local Emergency Planning Committee. Sally was going to give me a copy of who's on it.
We never got it.
She's planning on resigning, and I have no idea who's on it. She hasn't sent it yet, so that's going to be delayed 1 month. But other than that, everything is on the agenda that stands. So looking for approval of the amended agenda.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Mr. Seisha, seconded by Mr. Johnson. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
You gotta be kind of, wait for
Yeah. Hearing none. Carried. Minutes from February sessions. You got more than one?
Move to approve.
No, just one.
Second.
George and Kurt.
Motion by Brandt, seconded by Mr. Skoyan. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Carried. Appearances. I see he's on camera. District Attorney Don Seisha.
Where?
Good evening, everybody. And I'm sorry, Mr. President, is now my time? Should I start talking?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Great to be with you guys again. It's kind of hard to believe that a year ago I was in front of you guys and we were kind of talking about, or I talked quite a bit about what the office was doing to kind of prepare for COVID. You know, it's been a strange year for all of us. I'm pleased to say that you know, with the drop in COVID risk level for the county, that court proceedings are returning to in person. We're kind of doing a blended model at this point where people are still able to appear remotely if they choose, but the limits on in-person proceedings have been lifted. So it's my hope that we're going to be kind of getting back to normal, hopefully, as more people get vaccinated and the numbers continue to drop, that we'll kind of be transitioning back to in-person proceedings. I think that there is a benefit to all parties to have proceedings in person. I think that it's a more meaningful experience to everybody involved, victims, defendants, everybody involved. I think benefits from that in-person connection. So I'm glad that the numbers are dropping. Glad that the county's getting a handle on the COVID crisis, and hopefully but that continues and we can get back to normal. Looking to our case numbers, or excuse me, I guess our criminal case numbers, not COVID case numbers. We in the last quarter, since last I talked to you guys in December, we've had about 320 cases come in that time period. Comparing that to a year ago, we had about 340 cases. So although the number is down a little bit, it's not that far off. And that's kind of been the theme of 2020. Our numbers were down just a little bit, but not by that much. So despite all the changes in society more broadly, we are still having a substantial caseload. Law enforcement is still very busy. Our office is still very busy, and so we're operating kind of at the same capacity that we were a year ago or the year before that. So things continue to be busy. Also, in the last quarter, we've had a full quarter with our new ADA, Mike Diaz. There was a nice story about him written up in the paper a few weeks ago. Kind of about his life experience and kind of what brought him here. He was born and raised in Puerto Rico, so perhaps unsurprisingly, he's fluent in Spanish. He's also fluent in 3 other languages, so he's a really talented guy. But we've reaped the benefits of his ability to speak Spanish. It's allowed us to communicate directly with victims and defendants alike. Kind of see.
Oops, we lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
We lost you
We lost
temporarily.
you for a second.
Okay, am I back? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Mike's fluency in Spanish has not only saved the county the expense of an interpreter, but more importantly, it's allowed my office to build stronger and better relationships with the people that we work with. We're able to kind of get better buy-in from defendants when they have a prosecutor who can deal with them directly. They don't have to have a conversation that's intermediated by an interpreter. They feel that they're less estranged from the system when a person who's a system actor can communicate with them in their native language. And so I think that's a really good thing. Additionally, we've had a number of meetings with victims who are Spanish speakers, victims' families, and the ability to have someone here who can communicate naturally and fluidly with victims is huge. It really breaks down some walls. It kind of creates trust and creates comfort. And when a person's been the victim of a crime, that's real comfort that's meaningful to them. And so we're very fortunate to have Mike in this office, and he's doing a great job. So yeah, he's completed his first quarter with us. That's probably the biggest change since last I was here. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or concerns, I'm happy to address those now.
Any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I guess I have a comment. I've had the opportunity to sit on some hearings with the new Assistant District Attorney, and I would concur with everything that John said. I think it's a great asset for us to have that in the criminal justice system, and everything that he said about the benefit to victims is absolutely true. And so I think it's something, certainly it's exciting. As a victim advocate, I was thrilled to see it.
And we really look forward to kind of getting out in the community. I know Mike and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, and it's not something that I kind of foisted on him. He said that he was really excited to kind of get out into the community and just kind of do some outreach along with law enforcement to kind of increase buy-in from non-native English speakers in the county. You know, it's a real concern for me and other people in my position that there might be a large population of people who are being victimized and who are vulnerable, but who might not trust the criminal justice system, might not trust law enforcement, might not trust the district attorney's office, and might be afraid to report their victimization because they don't understand how the system works, and they don't understand that if you come forward as a victim to law enforcement or to my office, we're going to do everything that we can to avoid putting you in a bad situation. We're going to put you in contact with help and resources to try to improve your situation. You don't have to kind of suffer quietly at the hands of a person who's exploiting your vulnerability. And so Mike and I are both really excited to get out there and talk to people. I did my first ride along. Now that folks are getting vaccinated and everyone's kind of getting a little bit back to normal. So I did my first ride along last weekend. I think since COVID-19 rolled out a year ago. So once I'm looking forward to kind of getting back on the ride along schedule, and then also once both Mike and I are fully vaccinated, kind of getting out in the community and talking to folks in the Hispanic community as well.
Go ahead, Ms. Miller. Or Jeannie Nutter, go ahead.
Oops.
I'm not hearing you.
You're mute.
Yeah, sorry. I'm kind of used to Zoom, so everything's different here. I just wanted to, I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I just really appreciate your comments, John, and your concern and care for victims in the community. And I just really appreciated your words, so thank you.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. It's one of the most important aspects of this job is being a strong advocate for victims, and it's tough to be a strong advocate for victims if there's a wall between you as an advocate and your victim or the victim of the crime. And not only has language been a barrier historically, but that sort of institutional trust or lack thereof has been a real barrier. And so I think that kind of by addressing one prong of that with the language component, we might be able to kind of address that trust prong by being able to get out there, communicate with victims and with the community more broadly, and just get buy-in. I think it's really important. So thanks for that, Jeannie. I appreciate it.
Sure, I appreciate it too, so thank you for your good work.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing or seeing none, thanks, John.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Okay, compensation study explanation. Patrick Nguyen of Carlson Dittman Consulting or Consultant. Yep, there you go.
How's everybody tonight?
Good.
Fine, thank you.
We've only got about an hour and a half presentation, if you're okay with that. I did that to your department heads earlier today. I won't do that to you, I promise.
It was an hour and 20 minutes.
This is that's one of the challenging things with this, is that this is something you don't do all that often, nor should you do all that often. But in terms of the workload inside the county and, even at the board level is not going to be inconsequential in terms of trying to arrive at the decisions that you need to make and need to really take into consideration. So one of the reasons I'm here, and by the way, my name is Patrick Nguyen from Carlson Dittman Consulting. I know I've seen some of you at the initial presentation to the committees, but just by way of quick introduction, I've been with Carlson Dittman for coming up on my 8th year now, in just a couple months here. And before that, I spent 19 years in county government in Wisconsin, working for 3 different counties. I started my career, in fact, Paul and I were just talking before, in Marquette County, was deputy county clerk, and then HR coordinator, and then administrative coordinator for a couple of years, and then I moved to Sauk County, and then my last 13 years of my career I spent in Calumet County as their Director of Human Resources. So it's always nice to be back in a county government setting. That's where I'm most comfortable. That's where I grew up, career-wise. And even on this part of the state, I grew up on this part of the state, so it's nice to be back in this area and see the bluffs and everything else going on around here. But we got a lot of things we want to go through, and I want to get through them relatively quickly. I tend to speak quickly. I speak a lot, but quickly. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. The presentation we have here this evening, Amy will get it to Paul, and Paul will make sure that you have access to it as well, so you don't have to keep writing everything down and those sorts of things. Trying to get this to work. Daryl. There. I can look this until, or not.
That wasn't the answer.
Yeah, even though mouse won't change it, or the keyboard won't change it. There we go. So when I begin these, I like talking about kind of what's going on in the world around you, because that's usually what causes the need for us to be here. And so when we look at this, and in fact, this graph right here, you see 3 colors. It's a little bit hard to pick out the red one on the bottom, but that's probably the least important one. But you have that yellow line and you have the orange line. I drew a triangle on top of it just to kind of show the difference between them. But since the last recession, and these numbers track, the workforce, the yellow line being the employees who are quitting their jobs, versus the orange line, those employees who are laid off or discharged, you can see how that growth in that gap between those two grew quite dramatically. And that's a big deal from an employment perspective, because that means it's an employee's marketplace in those situations. Employees, during the last recession, there were a lot of layoffs and discharges, and as that grew, employees who perhaps took a job a little bit further from home than they wanted to, or maybe at a level lower after they got laid off, a level lower than what they wanted. And as we slowly climbed out of the recession and then went into a booming economy, people maybe got that job closer to home or at a higher wage or at a higher level in an organization. But it put a lot of pressure on our counties and our private sector organizations. And then in 1 month, everything fell apart. Exact same data, it just this portion of the graph had to go all the way up here because of the layoffs that occurred in March of last year. But the one thing I want to note, and I think it's something that we're going to start seeing more and more of, is that this gap is beginning to grow again. You can see it's almost at the level it was previously, and we are seeing signs of the economy heating up from an employment perspective again. And during the pandemic, or during the early stages of the pandemic, there was a lot of questions. County boards, city councils, our private sector clients, what's going to happen with wages? Are wages going to go backwards? And the answer, first of all, there are books written on, in fact, one titled, Why Wages Don't Decrease During a Recession, that they just didn't. And in fact, we're seeing evidence that they're beginning to pick up steam again, especially in certain sectors, such as engineering and public works. And of course, we always have challenges finding nurses and law enforcement personnel, and you can keep going down that list of various jobs that exist. And so I just have this up here, this will be in your slide, but just basically explaining that quits serve as a measure of their willingness and ability to leave a job, placing pressure on wages. On top of that, and this was from 2 years ago, but it still holds relatively true, we're seeing what is called a blue-collar drought. That for many positions, especially those that you would tend to hire here at the county, when you start dealing with construction, custodial, even machine repair or maintenance, all of those sorts of occupations, nationwide, we are seeing fewer and fewer people go into those blue-collar or the skilled trades or whatever that might be. And there's a bigger push going on to try to encourage people to go into those. But we're seeing the results of that, which again, when you have a shortage of workers, it places a pressure on the wages to bring talent into an organization. If I just keep piling on the good news, right? All of this, against the backdrop of our workforce continues to get older. Not just our workforce, and as we'll see in some of the coming slides here, our population. This was from a few years ago, but it still holds true that, we've been talking about, when I started this, and back in 1994, we were talking, I remember sitting at WCA meetings and the like, that the baby boomers someday are going to retire, what are we going to do? And now we're seeing evidence of that. And in fact, just last November, there was an article published by the Pew Research Center talking about how baby boomers are beginning to retire at a higher clip than what we expected. And so again, that largest generation exiting the workforce places a lot of pressure from a recruitment standpoint, and where do we find the employees to fill those voids. At the same time, the millennials coming into the workforce, in fact, have eclipsed the baby boomers, and it's not a matter of picking on the millennials, it's just they happen to be the largest generation in our workforce today. This is a slide that we put together. Wisconsin DHS published a report, this is actually 6 pages from that we condensed to 1, that shows how Wisconsin's population in general is gradually getting older, and this is 2015. It takes you all the way to 2040, and you can see the darker blue it gets, the older the population is getting. And I'm not saying that that's a challenge necessarily in Trempealeau, and in fact, I think your demographics being sandwiched between Eau Claire and La Crosse puts you in a slightly better position than a lot of other counties in dealing with some of those situations. But again, from an overall market standpoint, you're seeing a supply of workers, and not just the boomer generation exiting, but also the millennial generation. And this is, the older millennials, but again, the loss, generally speaking, of the millennial employees either leaving Wisconsin or leaving the areas, up in here, is placing pressure, throughout the state as well. So it's a matter of where's our one generation going, and we're losing the next generation that we're expecting to fill that void. And so everybody is in a challenging situation to try to find that next generation of worker to fill all of the openings that you have or will have into the future. And then for you, you're in a thankless position of trying to administer a compensation structure. The reason why I say this is I don't think anybody ran for county board on the platform of, hey, I want to administer a compensation. I want to deal with this on a month in, month out basis. All sorts of things that you have to deal with, whether it be competing committee demands, that you're a board made up of committees and those expectations. I'm not going to read each one of those off, but the point is that there's an entire, even the benefit of local government, where people have the most access. And that's one of the things I love about local government is that access that people have. But for you, it's a blessing and a curse. I guarantee you, one or more, or all of you have received phone calls, relating to compensation or other matters that are usually, if I was on a private sector board of directors, I wouldn't dream of getting those sorts of calls. You, again, being a representative of the public, you get those. And so it just makes your job that much more difficult. And it turns really difficult to say no in a lot of those situations, or in some cases, it's difficult to say yes, depending on what you're dealing with. And so when we deal with that, against that backdrop of lots of changes going on in the economy, you're in a position of, what did I sign up for here? And we still have to do this because, again, you want to have a compensation structure that's competitive and allows employees to come in, but also that they stay here. And again, that's something that I think a lot of, organizations such as yours, they struggle with in the backdrop of, well, we got that pull of Eau Claire, we've got that pull of La Crosse. You've got a lot of things going for you just in terms of not being in those situations as well. I've lived and worked in small communities my entire life, and I would much rather live here. And I think, again, that's one of the benefits of being in the position that you are. In terms of the general project overview, just want to go through a couple things. And in fact, I went through, I forgot to edit this particular slide. We're not going to go through the job documentation. But we want to talk about the process. We want to talk a little bit about any questions or concerns you might have and kind of set the stage. So when I come back to you 4 to 6 months from now, I'm guessing it's probably going to be in the August, September range, that I'm not hitting you with some of these questions for the first time. Some of these are, when you start talking about compensation philosophy, let's make certain that we do this and we do this right and we do it in a thoughtful manner. And we'll certainly provide guidance where necessary on some of those. But as we look at these, and we look at these projects, there are 2 main concepts we're always talking about. Internal equity. How do positions compare to one another inside the organization? And a lot of times that receives the greatest focus from employees. Because employees know, I know what I do, I know what the person sitting next to me does, I'm getting paid more than or less than the person sitting next to me, and I either like it or I don't like it. And that's, like I said, those are the easiest comparisons to draw. But you also have this sense of external competitiveness. People generally know if their wage is market competitive or not. But at the same time, having both of those things in place, a level of internal equity and external competitiveness are absolutely crucial to devising a compensation structure. And in doing so, we utilize a consistent methodology. All of the things that we plug in, the markets, the surveys, the job evaluation ratings, all of those vary from client to client to client. But the engine that drives all of that is consistent. So, despite all those variables, our methodology and our approach is consistent from project to project, state to state. It really doesn't matter. And one of the things that the public sector has built in, for good or bad, is this notion of transparency. Every single decision that's made and the byproduct of those decisions is known. It's known to you, it's known to the employees, it's known to the public, or at least accessible to the public. And so again, that is a blessing and a curse. When I do these projects with a private sector organization, 99.9% of the time, the employees don't even know who I am, let alone what we're doing with the company when we're on site. We're here, everybody knows, what's going on, and so it just, again, is one of those differences, but again, you have a transparent process built into this equation. In terms of the four main questions, and I'm not going to dwell on it here because we have slides that will talk about that, but we're always looking at four main questions and kind of the anchor for your decision-making process as well. What is that market of comparison? Where do you want to be in that marketplace? Once you have those two things figured out, how do you want to deliver pay? And there's some options there. And sometimes the more difficult question, because it always comes down to money, is how do you implement the structure? And how do you sustain it in the long run? And in terms of how we approach this, we're at the very front end of a project. Our goal is to navigate through this, like I said, sometime in the August, September. It might trickle over into October, but absolutely you'll have information in time for your budget making and your, especially the key budget making decisions. As we're talking here, we've had some initial conversations and we've begun the orientation process with the departments. We had a lengthy meeting with your department heads this afternoon and some supervisory staff as well. We'll be collecting employee job documentation over the course of the next couple of months. And there's a couple forms that we gave options for, but again, the point is the employees and or departments are providing the information to us. We're not telling them what their jobs are. We're getting that, coming the other direction. And we've already begun some level of market data collection, even though we need some guidance. We're not looking for a decision. I'll explain why in just a few minutes here, but at least some guidance, or at least if there's an objection or input. So I'll pause in a few slides here. We'll be spending a lot of time. So once we get that job documentation near the end of April, we will be spending probably then the next month to month and a half evaluating every single job. So we have 130 jobs subject to this study. We'll be applying our job evaluation system to every single one of those. And then we'll be coming back to meet with all of your departments to talk about, here's what we see in this job, we don't understand this, or asking questions in terms of recruitment or retention challenges or other matters relating to compensation or classification. So when we come back about 2/3 of the way through the process, this is about halfway through the process, about 2/3 of the way through, we've got as much input as we need from those departments to give you a preliminary view of the way we see the world. Then get the guidance from you. Are we headed down the right direction, or are we all wet? And we need to go back and retool a few things. And once we get that guidance, the final report, final adoption, and then after that, if selected, I should put optional in there because it's always optional for a board. But we found in the public sector, having an appeals process just provides you that, because everything is transparent, it allows you to dot your I, cross your T's, and make certain that if we've missed something or if documentation was insufficient, we can always go back and again, recalibrate or reconfigure that particular job. So one thing I just wanted to identify here, some of you, or all of you, should have received an email from me. One, an introductory email, and the second one would have come from SurveyMonkey. asking for your input on the compensation structure, or on the classification compensation study. I believe there's 8 or 9 questions, pretty straightforward, what works with your compensation program, what doesn't, what's unique about your county in comparison to others. We have some questions here that we ask and answer. You don't have to respond to the survey. We highly encourage it. Again, what we're trying to do is get a sense of the overall situation with your current compensation plan, what success looks like to you. So hopefully we can deliver on that, but also trying to get a sense of if there are differing viewpoints, how can we kind of meet in the middle someplace? Or if there are expectations that, for us doing something that isn't part of the scope, we can identify that immediately, as opposed to getting to the end as, oh, no, we're not going to talk about that. Again, trying to manage your expectations and the process as well. But in this particular case, we've had 16 respondents so far, almost all departments. There was one county board supervisor, I forget, and I don't even know who, but one of the sections we ask about, is the system competitive? Is it internally equitable? Are they paid appropriately? Is it understandable? And should performance be part of the mix? Right now, there's not an overwhelming consensus that, this is, so 0 would be strongly disagree, 4 would be strongly agree. And we're not getting a clear, it's kind of middle of the road. Not bad. No response would be bad in this, I'm sorry. Any of the responses are not bad. I can't speak tonight, so you'll forgive me. But again, if you want to take the opportunity, and that way when we come back later on in the process, we can talk to you about where you thought this should go, and hopefully how we're meeting those expectations. In terms of evaluating the jobs, we look at a number of factors, but the thing that's crucial for us, in fact, it's impossible for us to do this work without some form of job documentation. And we've laid out for the departments, whether it's a form that we supply or it's a form the county supplies in form of a job description, it makes no difference. But, and I've harped on this for years. In fact, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I did a webinar for WCA on job documentation and employee classification. And the point is that you can't rely on job documentation enough in the work that your department managers do, your human resources director. We use it for a small component. But that documentation, if it's done and it's done right and put together, can be used all the way from recruitment all the way through termination. And can be that supporting documentation for even something as employee culture. We do a lot of employee engagement work in our firm, and one of the surveys we use, the first question they ask is, I know what's expected of me at work. Well, yes or no? And the easiest answer to that is, or the easiest clue, is a good piece of job documentation. I know what's expected of me. Here's my job description. It tells me what I'm expected to do, on top of supervisor relations in terms of regular ongoing communications. But again, the point being, job documentation matters, and it matters a lot. Once we take that job documentation, we start evaluating it for content. And initially, at least kind of the ground level here, is we're taking the individuals involved in the study, Jane, Joe, Jim, it doesn't matter who, and removing the personal characteristics. I like this employee. I don't like that employee. You can have those opinions. There's nothing wrong with that, but the point is we're looking at the duties, responsibilities, and requirements of the job, not the individual's performance. Oftentimes I'll have a board member or department say, well, why is this person getting paid so much? They're lousy. That's a performance issue. If they're lousy, they probably, there's other things you should be doing to make certain that they're not lousy. Or why isn't this employee paid up here? They're fantastic. Again, there are things you can do, but that's a performance matter that we're trying to take out of the equation. And again, that's a very important thing for us to make certain that we lay that groundwork. Those evaluations are based on the job documentation, supplemented by lots of other information. Some jobs have their roots in the statutes. We can go to the statutes, here's what's expected of you, or contracts, organizational charts. Our meetings with department heads are crucial to this in terms of having good job evaluation, because we can get clarification to our questions. And our goal ultimately is to look at jobs across the entire organization And you might have, administrative support in 5, 10, 15 departments, and trying to compare one department to the other, our system allows us to do that, as well as jobs that might have different levels. Sometimes we see this, and I'll use a public works department in a city as an example, where we might have 2 or 3 levels of engineering technician. You might have, a couple levels of social worker, in some organizations, just depending on what you're working with, but we can stratify that. And how do we do that? We look at 5 main factors, but really the work occurs in the sub-factors with this system. So when we look at thinking challenges, that's what we're looking at, but what we're really looking at is how complex are the thinking challenges that the employee has to deal with. What is the type of response that they have to give? And our system has various criteria that we look at and say, okay, this is, once we get down to a certain level, yep, this is it, and we can give it a point value and work our way through. So we look at thinking challenges. We look at decision making. What is the impact of the judgments on the organization? Over what slice of the organization do they have decision-making authority? Do they worry mostly about their job and that's it? Do they have some authority across their department? Do they have authority across multiple departments? Or are they responsible for the entire organization? And again, as you can kind of picture in your mind, job, department, multiple departments, organization-wide, fewer and fewer employees, would qualify as you work your way across. And that's the way our entire system works. As you work your way across or work your way down, we're working through our system, it's more and more difficult to get into those higher levels, as it should be. It's just the way an organization tends to work. And then the final question we ask on the decision making is, what type of decisions are you making? Are you providing input? So whether it's a financial type of position, or sometimes you'll find in an engineering department, someone who's putting together preliminary drawings for the engineer to make a recommendation. But the point is, am I providing information? Do I make suggestions to the decisions that occur? Do I get a vote? Am I a participating employee in that decision-making process? Or the last piece, am I the final decision maker? Again, those are few and far between, and especially in a public sector organization, you don't find a lot of final decision makers, because that final decision-making authority usually rests in this room. We look at interactions, the communications that occur inside and outside the organization, and the impact on the flow of information or data as we work our way through. We also talk about the work environment. What are the types of things that can hurt you? What is a physical requirement of the job? And then that last piece, if you are filling that job tomorrow, what is the education and experience required to fill that job? And so we go through each one of those factors, and if we've got 130 jobs, we go through each one of those factors for each of those 130 jobs. So we can then be start getting a sense of how is that organization layered, because what we'll see is we'll have a grid that looks a lot like this, except for instead of 5 jobs, we'd have 130 jobs for your organization, where you'll see lots of letters and numbers. So, for example, the manager, I'll just use preparation experience because I have those down cold, that the 6 in our language is a bachelor's degree. The D in our language is 4 to 5 years of experience. So we've evaluated it as requiring bachelor's and 4 to 5 years of experience. The 3C, high school diploma, 2 to 3 years of experience. So each one of those letters and numbers means something to us, and there's point values associated with each one of these. And so when we add those up, this job adds up to 1,084, all the way to 361, and then we can start grouping them together. We can say, well, this administrative assistant, I know you can't see it there, but is from 350 points to 349 points. All jobs that fit in that range will fit in this grade. And you just keep building those grades on top of each other until you have a full structure. And at that point, and as we've been evaluating the jobs, we start thinking to ourselves, all right, this job, I know I've got market data for. This one's a little sketchy, I'll put this off to the side. So if we've got 130 jobs, I'm guessing we'll come back to you with about 60 to 70 benchmark jobs that we can use to help build a compensation structure and make recommendations. And that would be more than enough to do that. But what we would do, and you'll see, and I only have one of these up here tonight, but when we come back through in a few months, we'll have a series of charts that will show you where you stand currently, where you stand in the marketplace, and then putting those on top of each other. But with this particular one, all we're doing is looking at your current structure and looking for things that we might need to explore more deeply. So if I look at this, what are some of these explanations for some of these outliers? Jobs that are rated the same but paid differently? Why is that? Is it based on tenure, age, or is it something else that we need to dig a lot more deeply, and that if it's a male-female issue? In some organizations, every once in a while we'll see that, that I have zero expectation of that. Like I said, I've seen it once in terms of being a true and real problem we needed to address. In this particular example, it was former union, former non-union, and as we eased our way out of Act 10, that began to correct itself. And quite honestly, the other thing that we do, if you look at this is current pay. When we bring in the market pay, things tend to get a little bit closer to that line and make a little bit more sense. We don't always know the reason. Every once in a while, we'll have somebody who will say, I call somebody a manager, so I think they should be paid the same. When we dig more deeply, this manager might have higher educational requirements than this one. This one might have responsibility for more employees than this one. So sometimes these jobs that are paid the same but rated quite a bit differently, what if we have 2 levels of manager? And of course, in this particular case, it's exactly what solved that problem, is we have 2 levels of manager and things came out of it. So, but the point is there's lots of things we look at and tools we use to help make those recommendations for the organization. Once we get all of that done, well, with the exception of this question, because this is a front end of the process question, but questions 2, 3, and 4, we're laying the groundwork in everything we do. But this first question, who are we comparing to? What we tend to look at are 2 different marketplaces. There's a lot of overlap there. One I would call the more traditional, comparable, union setting, who's like us. In that particular case, Eau Claire, La Crosse get thrown out the window. You start looking at Buffalo, Jackson, Monroe, maybe Vernon. You start throwing in those other counties who align a little bit more closely with your size, your structure, your population, commuting patterns. But the challenge is you're not just competing with those counties who are just like you. Again, being sandwiched between Eau Claire and La Crosse, you're almost doing yourself a disservice if you don't look at, and right here it says competitive marketplace. So when we talk about that, who's trying to take your talent? Or who are you trying to steal from? And so, big versus small, public versus private. And so when we look at this, that's also one of those reasons why it becomes a little bit more difficult to try to assess what truly is that marketplace. So when we did the first pass of this, you can see some dark red, some pink, and then some light green right through here, and then yourself as well. But the local pool, who is contiguous with you and pretty reasonably close, includes the big and the small, La Crosse, the Eau Claires, Dunn, Pierce, in addition to those who are probably much more close to you in size. But also looking at from a regional basis, again, those who are a little bit more closely aligned with your population or other demographics. And then that third layer being, how important is Minnesota to these overall questions? On the answer to all of those, how important, the answer is, I don't honestly know. And the reason is because we don't have the data, and sometimes what you think is true, and I'll use a good example. I live in Calumet County, and everyone is afraid of Brown County. They pay so high. That was, back to my days of bargaining contracts, with all 6 of our unions that we used to have. We would never agree to compare to Brown County, but the reality is, if you're looking at from a wage standpoint and wanted to keep wages low, absolutely wanted to compare to Brown County. If anyone from Brown County is watching, I'm not trying to disrespect your county, but the reality is that sometimes reality or perception is not reality when you're dealing with these situations, and we just don't know that until we get the data. My recommendation to you, and this is one where, again, I don't need any official action, but I do need some input if I'm completely off base or crazy, that my recommendation is to collect data from all of these. Doesn't cost you any more money. If you cut a couple out, doesn't save you any money. It's just a matter of, we agreed to do a market-based survey for you. Is that it is easier for us to take data out of the equation at the end of a process than it is to add data in at the end of a process. Because we have to go through a whole process of, analyzing the pay structure and that sort of thing. My advice is, unless you have additions to the mix, let's collect data and then make some decisions further down the road in terms of what is the appropriate comparable mix for your particular study. Does, Houston, Wabasha, and Winona make a difference to your structure or not? Eau Claire, La Crosse, do they make a difference? And again, we can only tell you that if we have data, and I think it's important to at least have the answers to those questions, whether or not you use them. Any questions or concerns about that before I keep plowing through?
Yes. Mr. Chairman? Actually, Patrick, I have several, but I'll stop right, I'm glad you stopped right there. So why is it important that we collect data from all of those sources? Why would we intentionally exclude any? I mean, does it cost us X amount of dollars per county to collect the data? No. So why not get as much data as possible?
That's the point I just made. I agree with you.
No, I guess that was the question. Okay. And my previous question, I think I'd rather wait until you finish and maybe some of these will. I have a couple questions from earlier, but
fair.
Go ahead. I'll be interrupting your flow, so I'll stop.
Okay, does availability of candidates for the job enter into any of your financial decisions? Because we know there are certain jobs, there are just not people out there that are
like all of them?
Like all of them. But you
No, I get it.
agree with me, there are certain, we find it in every occupation, or every aspect of our employment. There are some jobs that people just don't want, and if you want those people, what do you have to do?
Okay.
Is that entered into any of your decision-making or not? Or don't you go into that deep?
Well, the short answer is it does.
Okay.
It's a complicated consideration, but that's also one of the reasons why the interviews with the department heads and the ongoing conversations we have with, HR and ultimately I would presume, the committee or the board, that what are some of those things? But that's also one of those reasons for the pre-project survey.
Okay.
That make certain that we have those insights ahead of time. But yeah, if you're trying to hire an engineer, if you're trying to hire a finance director, if you're trying to hire, I can probably go down a list of, building inspectors. I know it's more of a city concern, but good luck finding
No, it is
them.
not.
Yeah, but I mean,
We're not
that's,
there.
I did I don't want to tell too many stories. I know you got a lot of other, but we had a project we finished and we set the building inspector wage at $65,000 a year. I thought I did a really good job studying the market because we were concerned about it. Less than 2 weeks after the study was done, this was southeast Wisconsin, where Foxconn, whether or not it's going to, but it was under construction, that all of the tradespeople were kind of gravitating towards that work down there, that all of a sudden one community in like one night raised that job to $75,000 a year, and everybody was scrambling to try to fill it. And you're going to start seeing that more and more where, there are certain, and I'm trying to be careful of saying, particular departments, I don't want to give people false expectations that, hey, my wages are going to be way up here, but the point is absolutely there are jobs that are getting more and more difficult to fill, and the input from departments, but also we tend to see it as we work our way from project to project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I know you have lots more.
One more, John.
Go ahead.
It is actually relevant to what Chuck just asked about. One of the things that's been running through my mind as you've continued your presentation is we're always talking about wages. We're talking about wages, but my experience, and I think other people's experience, is that the prospective employee may have a lot of other things on his or her mind besides wages, or other factors weigh heavily into the decision to take that job. They can be as diverse as I want to be closer to my family, or I want to go cross-country skiing, or, I mean, there's a whole range of things. And we it's not that is there some way to factor those in? We can't ignore those, but it's hard to quantify them, or it's hard to build them into what should we offer this individual at this point in time. How do you handle that?
I think I'll touch on a little bit of that in a couple slides here, but I mean, it comes down to that total package that you offer. And it's not just wages, it's not just benefits, and it's a combination, and I'll just kind of foreshadow, because I'll skip over the slide a little more quickly when we get to it, is we're talking also about, the culture, the engagement of the employees, or the experience of the employees, that why people come to you. I've had organizations where they've made the choice that we're going to pay a little bit on the lower side. We're not going to pay low, but we're going to pay a little bit lower than what somebody might otherwise pay. But we're going to spend a lot of time and effort on our workplace culture. And I've seen people take pay cuts to go work for a good employer than, maybe take a pay raise or a lateral transfer, if you will, for someone where they might just get beat up every month, at a meeting. So culture plays a lot into it. There's a, I guess what you're trying to get, there's a lot of things that go into somebody's decision-making process, but the first thing that they see is the wage. In terms of, from a recruiting standpoint, and there's plenty of literature out there, if you don't have a competitive wage, you don't have to be the highest paid employer, but if you don't have a competitive wage, people are going to scroll past that advertisement for that particular job. And so it's not that wages are the most important, it's just what leads the conversation for many prospective employees.
Oh, that's a good start, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Continue then.
Okay. So from a market placement standpoint, this is one of those where it's an important consideration.
Why don't you just pick up the phone, Doc, and put it back down?
That was Joe Feltus, I think.
You want to take a couple seconds to call back, or?
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. But this is one of those where it tends to answer itself only because there's only so many directions you can go, especially from a financial standpoint. And so when we talk about, where do you want to be in the marketplace, for the time being, until we can come back to you with actual data of here's where you are versus where here's where you are versus where the market is. But consistently, organizations.
He's coming.
I'll just wait.
Joe, right? Yeah. Well, this is the county boardroom.
Then I hung up.
Okay. You should be back
This
on
is
now.
Joe Feltus.
Yep.
So as you can see, for the last 10 plus years, World at Work, which is our professional association in the compensation world, they do a survey, and about 90% of organizations build their pay structure around the 50th percentile. I've had a client recently, not too far from here, said we got to kind of pare that back. We're going to build it at the 40th percentile. They still move forward, but they need to build lower. I've had another county client who we're going to add money to it because we're in a position where people aren't moving into our community. So there are others who take different approaches, but the point is that most organizations build around that. And I would say it's really hard for any governmental organization in today's day and age to pay more or less than that. If you pay less than what the median of the market is, you're going to have a hard time recruiting and retaining employees. If you pay more, your budgets are going to be difficult to balance. I'm not saying it's impossible. Taxpayers usually have something to say about that, very rightfully so. But so it's that middle ground to build a structure. I'm not going to go through any of these others at this point. We'll talk about those later in the process. But again, that role of benefits. You cannot ignore benefits. And in fact, we'll be conducting an analysis as part of this process. But when we look at this, first of all, this notion of compensation, talking about that. Benefits, the cost, compliance, creating efficiencies. As I referred to before, and I think it's a very important thing, especially as we look forward 5-10 years down the road, I think the organizations that are going to have a leg up have committed to all three facets. That we're making certain that we value and appreciate the employees that we have, we're developing them, and we're managing them to be good leaders, to be good employees and good community servants. And I think, organizations that focus on all three are going to be the most successful. We tend to talk about benefits in 4 buckets, and realistically, you have control over 2 of them. Insurance, life, health, dental, disability, those sorts of things, you have all the control in the world. There's usually a floor. If you go too far below, again, recruitment and retention become a problem. But most organizations are relatively competitive, and it's really, really difficult to compare one organization to the next because of all of the different options that you have for designing your health insurance plan. Doing an apples-to-apples comparison is difficult, but hopefully as we, again, dig a little bit more deeply, we've got some tools to kind of help normalize that information. The mandatory, Social Security, Medicare taxes, unemployment, workers' compensation, you don't get a vote on those. Those are all set for you. The pension, again, it's established by the state. 10 years ago that was broken in half, and employees contribute half of that, you contribute half of that. And then that 4th bucket, the time off, is again another one of those where you have complete control over, but there's almost always a floor in those situations as well. That 3rd question that we'll ask is, what type of a pay structure? How do you want to deliver pay? Or in the eyes of the employees, you've adopted a structure. How do I get a raise? How do I move through that structure to my benefit? And there are a lot of things that are taken into consideration in designing that structure. Whether it's the market, do we have a local market? And the way our process works usually is for hourly jobs, it tends to be a much more localized marketplace. That you tend to, I would say probably in a 60-mile radius, give or take, and assuming that somebody lives halfway in between there, has a choice, do I go 30 miles this direction or 30 miles that direction? The regional is usually, when I say regional, I'm talking kind of going beyond that, probably the rest of those red counties, maybe into some of those pink, that is more supervisory, technical, advanced professional, or the super regional or national. I don't envision any national data needing to be pulled in for these, but maybe we want to look across the state. Maybe we cross the state border into Minnesota, but market data makes a big difference. We just talked about where do you want to be in the marketplace. Do you want to lag, do you want to lead, or do you want to be someplace in the middle? The relationship between pay and performance is a big question. It's a huge question. I sit in front of a lot of boards and councils, and I hear we want there to be a link between pay and performance. And then the follow-up question that we come back with is, what is the status or quality of your performance evaluations? Is it consistent? Are they done regularly? Are you committed, if you were to do pay for performance, to funding performance-based pay? And if the answer is I don't know or no to any one of those, it's really difficult to put pay for performance in place if you don't have the necessary tools and processes lined up as well. Or do you do some sort of a hybrid where you are matching those? So again, these line up, not much step-based. A lot performance, some hybrid, which is steps and performance. One thing I want to note, do I have it here? I don't have it here, but I'll just talk about this. Relationship between pay and performance on a step-based program. Note that we say not much when we talk about the relationship between pay and performance. And again, not knowing your policies at this stage in the process, one of our firm beliefs, our firm's firm belief, if we can get really technical here, that no employee should move through a pay structure in any way, shape, or form without some measure of an affirmative performance evaluation that you met the expectations of the job. You should be having those conversations once per year. And again, if an employee isn't meeting the expectations, they should not have the ability to move a step or performance increment or whatever the decision is. Because again, employees expect that, but you also owe it to yourself from a legal and a practical standpoint to be assessing that performance on a fairly regular basis. The other thing that's important in designing this structure is that work weeks matter. Because all of the private sector data we get comes to us in hourly wages, and most of the private sector organizations where we receive our survey data is usually based on a 40-hour work week. So we're going to give back to you, even for your salaried positions, an hourly equivalent that you can compare to. But you can see, you know, the 40-hour work week versus a 35 and everything in between, I can give you the best hourly rate possible. Here's this market rate for this job, but if your work week, what are you sitting at for a work week? 37 and a half?
It's 40 for most of them. We
Okay.
have a few that are less than 40.
Okay, but when you look at that, and they're not part-time employees, but they're full-time with a different work week, you can see the difference. So if you have a 37 and a half hour work week, even if I give you a very competitive hourly wage, you're still 6.25% behind the marketplace compared to what they could be making on a 40-hour basis. So I just want to make you aware in terms of the challenges that come with this. You know, and I've had some clients who have a 35-hour work week for some of their full-time employees. You're talking about 12.5% difference, you know, from the normal marketplace. So there's a lot of challenges that come with these sorts of projects. And then the last policy question is less of a policy question, just the practical application of everything that we've recommended. Is how do we implement this? How do we afford what's being placed in front of the board? You know, some of the challenges you have to deal with. You're always, I think probably 90% of your decisions is how does this affect our budget? Are we spending more money than what we allocated back in November? And you're dealing with levy limits. Cities deal with expenditure restraint programs. Fairness is always a challenge. You know, I have a lot of control over fairness. You have a lot of control over fairness. We have zero control over happiness. You know, you don't know that if this decision is going to make somebody happy or not. And what makes one person happy makes somebody upset. So again, there's always that challenge in terms of the work that we do, because there's nothing more personal than somebody's pay. The size of the increase. You know, sometimes we'll see situations if you're adopting a STEP program where the implementation puts somebody 1 penny higher than what they're getting today. They might have much higher earnings long-term available to them, but it's that short-term implementation that people tend to focus on, and it causes some issues. Sometimes length of service. You know, in fact, all of the time, yeah, I'd say all of the time, unfortunately, length of service is not a consideration for implementation. I'll show you an example of why in just a few moments in terms of when in front of a board, you know, what you're faced with. It's an unintended, well, it's intentional in the fact that we know that it's occurring, but with no other options or very few other options available. Then that last one, you know, the notion of exceptions, that there's a very slippery slope that, all right, we know you've been here a while, we like you, we'll make an exception for you in terms of where you fit in the structure. You better be prepared for the chain reaction of employees coming in month after month asking for consideration as well. Again, going back to that original slide of you're put in a thankless position, this is a prime example of that sort of a situation. The other challenge, and I get this a lot from boards and councils, so let's just hit it head on, are the types of increases to make its structure work. I'm going to talk about step structures for the time being, but a lot of the principles hold true for open range performance models. One is the across the board increase. What are we going to allocate for a wage increase next year? Every late summer, our firm, for like the last 7 years, our firm conducts a wage increase survey of the private sector and public sector in the greater 4-state region. And the overall results for 2020 and 2021, because we asked 2 questions. What did you do last year? That's a very solid number because we're assessing actions that were actually taken versus this side of the equation. What are you planning for next year? So what did you do in 2020? What are you planning for 2021? So about a 2.3% increase for non-union jobs, about 1.9% in 2021. So there's that increase. Let's just say 2%. That makes numbers easy. The other piece is the step movement. So this particular example, if I use a step plan, you know, employee sitting at 2313 today. New year rolls over, and so the policy allows for, you know, each year you move a step in the system. So they go from 2313 to 2359. Right, back up, rewind, sorry. They get a 2% increase first. So 2% is 2313 to 2359. That's your 2% increase. Then that step movement after that is, you know, 2423. So they go from 2313 to 2423, you know, as part of that 4.5% increase. Now at some point that terminates, you know, they reach the maximum here, and all they receive across-the-board increase. So it's not into perpetuity that that happens, but while the employee is moving through that, if I'm a supervisor, or if I'm anybody looking at this, I see consistent 4.5% increases. It's a lot of money that we have to account for and budget. The challenge is that across-the-board increase keeps you competitive with the outside marketplace. That generally speaking, wages have been going up about 1.92% over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. That's private sector and public sector data. So it's keeping you relatively competitive with the outside world. Those step increases create that equity between long-term employees or top performers, depending on how you structure your system, and those who are shorter term or lower performing. And so both of those raises are crucial to making the plan work, but they can place a burden on a compensation structure and a budget. And every single organization wrestles with these sorts of issues. So from a costing standpoint, and this is a real life example, and actually the county wasn't that much smaller than you when we did this study. And so when we come back, and especially at the committee level, here are the options for implementation. The first two lines in every time we do this are what I call the bookends. What's the cheapest way of implementing, and what's the most expensive way? The cheapest way is in a step structure, putting employees on the step in the new structure that provides an increase. That's where we get to that penny. It could be $1, just depending on what. So if I'm currently making $25 an hour, and if that next step in the new structure is $25.01, that's where I get placed. If it's $25.50, that's where I get placed. The alternative, employees say, understandably, and again, I don't want any employee who's listening or will be listening to this to think that their years of service don't matter. They absolutely do. Now we're talking about dollars and cents, that taking years of service into consideration, and we place everybody, so if I'm at 15 years, well, 10 years is a maximum rate, so I'd be placed at the max. I'm here 6 years, I'd be at step 7, so on and so forth. That $313,000 grows to 1.4 million. Again, these aren't your numbers, but they would, again, it tracks every project I do, this sort of thing. Lots of organizations that I work with, okay, I can afford a 3.3% increase. Don't love it. We might have to rearrange spending priorities. We can make it work. And I could probably, if I needed to convince you, I don't, again, not knowing the situation, that's an easier conversation to have. If I come to you and say, we need 1.4 million, and it's about 14-15% lift, what are the odds of that passing? I could be in a completely, I gotta see that, but I could be in a completely different room, and everyone says, oh, that's perfectly fine, we got all sorts of money. I've never heard that in any county project I've ever worked with, or any county I've worked for. So that's the parameters or the boundaries of which you're working, and now you need to make a decision what works best. And so I'm not gonna go through the rest of these in detail, except to say, once you get past this job on these last three, we have alternatives to say, okay, well, what if it was, instead of getting rid of that penny situation, we'll move you to the step that provides at least a 1% increase. Well, it's easier, I'm not saying it's better, but it's easier to have a conversation of going from 300,000 to almost 450 versus 300 to 1.4 million. So there's always options, and there's ways of configuring this and talking with you, to try to do this. So we could say, well, what about a 2%? What about a 0.5%? Again, you can plug numbers in and it automatically recalculates. But this is where the process sometimes, I don't want to say grinds to a halt, but it gets real. And it gets to the point where, again, how do we make this work? How do we keep employees as happy as possible while still being fair and being true to our budget and to our other decision-making processes? And so in terms of where we stand, our tentative timeline where we're going is March, April, kicking off the project, getting the market data, getting the job documentation in our hands so we can begin analyzing it in June and July. And then I say August, September. I like to be optimistic. If it turns into early October, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep. Again, I know you got the county board meetings are usually a little bit later, but the point being that I think we're in a good standing to get this project done well in time for your major budget decisions, and at the very, very least, having the numbers in place that you can plug in with a high degree of confidence into your budget planning. So I've asked I've gone through a lot of stuff. I think you still have some questions on your plate.
I'd rather wait for other people to
Okay.
have, see if there are any others.
Is there any other questions? Patrick? Mr. Brandt?
Patrick, these are some questions that came up in a discussion with employees related specifically to the Department of Land Management. And during your presentation, something else occurred to me that relates directly to that, and we'll be talking about zoning in pretty soon here.
Sure.
Well, let me do the second question first. So you were talking about responsibility in terms of to the organization in terms of how much the employee is worth, I guess is the way to look at it. So you were talking about challenges, interactions, decision-makings, that sort of thing. But that was within the context of the organization. Do you take into consideration that within the context of the public?
Yes.
We have zoning administrators that go out alone to look at situations in which someone is looking for a rezone, say. They are the face of the county. They are the person who makes the decision. Granted, it's based on our zoning code and so forth, but that's, that can be challenging. There are those kind of interactions. So are you taking any of that into consideration?
So if I said that
responsibility is what
in the interactions and communications piece, it's interactions and communications with people inside or outside the organization.
Okay.
And then all those factors kind of flow through.
Excellent. And staying with the Department of Land Management, we have blended positions. We try to sort of quantify or even qualify where a land records coordinator would fit within the context of the county. And what we discovered is that it's unique. Every county is different in terms of where that office is located, with either in the treasurer or next to the treasurer, register of deeds, zoning, planning, whatever, or standalone. So, and many, if not all of the positions, are you okay over there?
Yep, I'm just grabbing something.
Okay, many, if not all of the job descriptions in that department are blended because of the desire that the committee has had over the years to make it possible for individuals to slide into other levels of responsibility if there's a need. So so how do you define those blended positions, or even the morphing positions over from the time this study is done until the next study? It's entirely possible that those job descriptions will have changed. So how do we approach that?
So I think there's a couple questions. One, I'm a very visual person, so I always make my own maps.
Mm-hmm.
So like I have the combined land and water conservation departments versus the standalone departments.
Right,
That example.
exactly what we're talking about.
That helps to, align, is it a like position? Every job, I say every job. I mean, I walk into some organizations, the job hasn't changed for 30 years. But, then you get to other departments and 15 minutes after a job description is published, it's out of date. So I mean, there's that balancing act.
Okay, so you're familiar with the
In fact,
the problem
yeah,
or the issue.
What we do is so we go through this process, we evaluate every single one of the jobs. Now we got the baseline. So your job you're talking about, let's just say 575 points is where it rates out at. I'm just using a fake example here. And then all of a sudden, you shuffle things around in the department, maybe a new program is added or whatever, and the county calls us and says, we got a job that we think we need reviewed. We do probably 400 of these a year for all of our clients, throughout.
So there is a review process.
We can reevaluate the jobs. There's a small fee associated with it for our time, but we reevaluate those jobs and say, okay, we think it goes from 575 to 603, it crossed the threshold to the next grade. Or we could say it's 575 and it goes to 585. And it didn't cross that threshold, but we reset the base, so next time it's looked at, it's got a higher baseline, so if it grows. So yeah, we look at jobs all the time. In fact, I get to the hotel tonight and I've got a few that I need to do before tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Those answers. That answers both my questions.
Good.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
That sounds like Sally Miller.
That is Sally Miller.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm been wondering about this as the presentation's gone on. We have a few positions in the county that are we have, like recently within the health department, for example, where we are now sharing the cost and the responsibility of management of an employee with another county. So how does that, we've got two different entities looking at job descriptions, job expectations,
My guess, so,
building into that into like memorandum of understanding. So how does this tackle those type situations? Because we have a few.
sure, and
that I can think
I would
of.
say that when it comes to those, and don't let me get away without, I didn't answer part of your question about blended jobs, and I think it's important. But in terms of joint ownership or whatever it might be, I would guess in most situations, there's usually a fiscal agent that says, that they're our employee, they're on our wage schedule, and so who ultimately is paying for the job doesn't make much difference to us. In fact, every once in a while, I'll have a department say, well, I want you to increase this position, and the question I ask is, well, has something changed? Have the duties increased? Have the educational requirements? No, we just got more money from a grant or from the state, and so we want to pay this position more. For us, and I mean, you can do whatever you want as an organization, but for us, unless the duties and responsibilities change, it doesn't matter what the funding source is, as long as we have that core job description to make that analysis. Now, I will tell you that those multi-county jobs, I know that you just did that with a WIC position, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so anyways, that it might impact, the decision-making, or it might impact the work environment because they're going to be on the road more, bouncing back and forth between the two counties. So there are some considerations with that, but in terms of the core duties, I don't see that changing, and it depends. I mean, if it's not your position, which I presume it is, then Buffalo County needs to worry about that as one of their jobs, but it would just be evaluated like every other job and placed accordingly with due consideration to the differing aspects of being a multi-county job. Before I answer your question, did I answer the question? Was it?
Yes, you did. Thank
Okay.
you.
But relating to blended jobs, that one of the hallmarks when we work with smaller counties or smaller cities, other communities, that there's always blended jobs. You might hire somebody to be a part-time GIS tech and a part-time zoning administrator. Not all of that uncommon. That we have a rule of our own that if it is two jobs combined into one, we can assess them. And we've got the mechanism built in to say, okay, we're going to take 50% of a zoning tech and 50% of a GIS tech, and we'll come up with a blended rate. And so we can, analyze that market data. If it's more than two, we begin splitting hairs a lot of times. But usually it's, hey, we've got money for this job at 50%. We have money for this job, but only at 50%, or need at 50%. So like I said, we're not phased by blended jobs. It happens all the time. And like I said, we can certainly report on it and figure that out.
Yes, go ahead.
It's a question I hesitate to ask, but I'm asking it anyway. So as a member of the Personnel Bargaining Committee, we will, before your recommendation comes to the full board in a number of months, we will have employees and department heads asking for reclasses, for step increases. It happens on a monthly basis. So I'm looking for not an order per se, but a recommendation as to how the Personnel Bargaining Committee should, during the course of this process, how we should handle requests for pay increases.
So I'll be very blunt with you, which might not make me the most popular person in the room or in the courthouse, but I'm just going to be that it's hard to do an analysis against a constantly moving target. That if we receive a job today, and then next month it changes, and the month after that it changes, I'm not saying it would change for every job, or if we get another batch of changes, it makes it really difficult to make that assessment. What I would recommend, and what we've recommended fairly consistently with our clients, that unless it is impeding a recruitment, that I would put a moratorium on all reclassifications until the results of the study. Only because then you can, what happens if you overshoot a job? And then all of a sudden we have to deliver the message that you overshot it. And now we have not only that situation you have to rectify, but also an upset employee. Now, you're gonna have upset employees on either end of the equation. Either I'm not getting the reclassification I thought I could get now, or not getting the answer I want later, but allowing the study to make the appropriate analysis and make the appropriate recommendations, and department by department, if there are individual positions where special attention needs to be given, that, hey, we were submitting this for a reclassification because of all of the changes, again, that's a fantastic opportunity for that department head level meeting to talk to the individual departments, say, okay, let's talk about this and what's going on and ongoing. But I've seen so many situations in these processes where we're trying to do our level of work, and what's going on behind the scenes keeps changing what we're trying to analyze. So my recommendation is put a moratorium on it, but it's your county, it's your decision-making process, and you can certainly do as you see fit.
John,
Yes. Ms.
this
Sweattick.
is Jeannie.
Yes.
I'm not sure if Amy's in the room, but I think, George, we talked about this at our last personnel meeting, that we would indeed put a moratorium on those. It's only maybe normally it's June when we look at these reclassifications, although there have been some in between, but we're looking at August, maybe September, when this would be done. So I thought we were already moving in that direction, that we would put a moratorium on.
You want to respond to that? Amy is here.
Hi, Jeannie. Hello.
Hi, Amy.
Yes, we did have that discussion, and I know that came from Patrick's recommendation when this was approved, and so that message was delivered to the Personnel Committee at last month's meeting, but it's also good to hear from Patrick as to the reasoning why, because I may not have explained that as well as he could have. So I thank you for that question.
Any other questions? Hearing none? Thank you, Patrick.
I did have.
Oh, you want? Go ahead.
Again, I hesitate, just like George, I hesitate to ask this question. Is there another starting point? You mentioned across-the-board wages. Is there another starting point to begin making decisions other than arriving at a decision about a across-the-board wage? In this county, that's what we do. The Personnel Committee recommends a percentage increase. It's usually somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5. That's a huge amount of money, between 1.5 and 2.5. That goes to the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee tends to look at that and say, we can't afford that. And then we are in an impasse. Right at the beginning, is there some other way to begin the process other than a across the board interest? Is there some way to differentiate somehow between what this department should get and that department should get? Or is that an impossible question?
There's nothing that's impossible, but I'm gonna say it the way that I say it to people. It seems blunt and it seems a little bit raw, but it's really a true statement, is that, like I said, there's very few public sector organizations that are just flush from a cash standpoint, where the market, in that graph I showed you in terms of how fast the market was moving from people leaving their jobs, which puts the pressure on wages. You're in a highly competitive marketplace, in a competitive, sandwiched between two competitive, the Chippewa Valley and the greater La Crosse area are highly competitive regions of the state. That what I tend to tell people is that the market could care less about your inability to pay. Now, that being said, like I said, that sounds blunt and sounds raw, but really the market keeps chugging along one way or the other, and it really puts you in a bind, right? I mean, that there are ways of doing that, but it really comes down to more of a performance-based environment, where you're saying, we're willing to spend that money. If we're getting top performance, we're willing to spend it, but administering a pay-for-performance system places a huge strain on an organization. And what I'm about to say, I'm not suggesting you should do it, but when an organization that doesn't have that centralized administrator, administrative coordinator, executive type function, chief administrative officer, that someone to hold each department accountable that you are being too easy on your employees from an evaluation standpoint, you're being too tough in trying to make certain that you are working towards that common ground of equitable and consistent evaluations. But the reason why I'm talking about that is because it really, that's your main solution. You can say to a department, we've got, I'll pick a number out there. We've got $500,000 to spend, or maybe it's $250,000 to spend on wage increases next year. Your portion of that is $30,000, $10,000, whatever that number is. You get to smaller departments, it gets a little bit trickier, but there are ways of working your way through it. And you need to figure out how to allocate that money fairly. If you want to give everybody the same thing, more power to you, but it means your top performers aren't going to receive that recognition. If you want to recognize your top performers, it means you're going to have to make some tough decisions on maybe those who are just meeting expectations or maybe who aren't. So there are ways of doing that. It just gets more complex. I completely hear what you're trying to say as it relates to, steps and, across the board increases gets expensive. You can, we've done a lot of pay structures in recent memory. Let me just talk about, if I just bring something up here for a second. So I think it's a good question. I just want to make sure I can speak to it intelligently. One more. I deleted it. I didn't delete it, I just didn't put it in this presentation out of the interest. I can talk about it here. So from a pay plan standpoint, you have 87.5 to 112.5% is a typical step structure. That some organizations will say, most organizations, this is an approximation of the market rate, that 100%, we call it the control point in our plans. If you cannot get employees from the start step to the control point in a span of somewhere between 4 to 6 years, you're going to have problems in terms of retention. If you're not able to pay competitively in that span, but we see a lot of, once they get to that point, some organizations say, we're going to make this top range, those additional steps performance-based. So you have to find some way of contributing to the organization to move. But others, so right out of Act 10, we had a handful of counties who said, what if we made those steps, instead of every year going from here to here to here, what if we made them every other year? So it gives us a little bit of a cushion, and not every employee is going to fall in the same every other year cycle, so it's going to smooth itself out. That's one way of dealing with it. Then when we went back to those very same clients that made that decision, they said, well, we understand that even under the old union contracts, you would have steps that would go 1, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 9 years. I mean, there would be gaps in between there, but people were generally dissatisfied with those gaps. So we said, well, wait a second. If you're doing every other year at 2.5%, mathematically, with some rounding differences, is the same as 1.25% every year. So we've designed some step structures where above the control point, there's 10 steps instead of 5, but they're 1.25% steps. Some organizations say we don't want to pay to 112%, we want to pay to 110%. So when you get down to the implementation and the design and all those other sorts of things, there's all sorts of things we can do to try to help mitigate or at least make it a little bit more tempered. But you're always going to be wrestling with moving people through that structure, whether it's steps or performance, and keeping that structure current. Because you could look at it and say, well, you get your choice employees, you can get a step, or you can get across the board, but we can't do both. What's going to happen is that somebody comes in, whether it's us or a different firm, 2, 3, 4 years later and say, well, now if the market's moving at 2% per year and you said we're not going to do structural adjustments, you're probably going to be 6% behind the market. And that's perfectly fine. That's, as long as you know what you're doing when you're doing it. But first of all, compensation is expensive. I mean, just, that's why when you add a position to a table of organization, there should be a discussion. Is there a different means of doing this? But I'll go back to my old bargaining days. I used to negotiate contracts all the time. I had an AFSCME rep, and she drove me nuts when she said this, but she was absolutely right. We had a nursing home at the time, but the county board was debating, should we be in that business? And again, I don't want to step into that fray here. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. But the point being that all the unions had settled for 3%, and the nursing home union said, we want our 3%. Got the internal comparables, and anyone who knows anything about bargaining, internal comparables tend to rule the day. And we said, we can do it, but I know enough about the board that they're probably that's gonna probably push it over the edge, because you're right, it's a lot of money when you're putting it out there. And they said, we don't care, this is, we want our internal comparables. We negotiated the contract because we couldn't have won an arbitration. Within 2 years, it was closed. But what she would always tell me at the bargaining table was, you make the decision, county board, management, of whether or not to cut staff, whether or not to have a service. But to the extent you have that service, we want the best paid and the best benefits for the existing employees. I think that balancing act, but she's right, that as organizations, whether it was in 2007, 2008, when a lot of organizations recalibrated their organizational structures, maybe shed a few positions, when people retired, they didn't refill. My guess is you probably did a little bit of that last April, May. I don't know if you did or not, but I know some organizations weren't filling positions as they became vacant, as the pandemic was questionable. But I think that there does need to be that exercise in every single organization. Are there alternative means of filling this? Because it is expensive, and the expectations that employees have in terms of wage progression, and if categorically you say we're not going to do across the board, or we're not going to do steps, again, not making that assumption, but just if you made that decision, employees have the ability to, or tendency to find employers who will engage in that behavior. That, wait a second, if I go, I'm coming 15, 20 minutes this direction, if I go 15, 20 minutes the opposite direction, I can receive those sorts of increases, receive a competitive wage. And that's always that challenge that we're fighting against in the employment market. Long-winded answer, but there's no easy answer to what you're describing.
I didn't expect an easy answer. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Very good.
I look forward to working with you.
I think Kurt Berner's here from Samuel's Group. We're going to give us a project update. You see it.
Evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'll do my best not to keep you long. I know you've got a lot of stuff to get through yet. Just wanted to give you a brief update on the progress that we've made since the last time I met with you, some of the upcoming things, and then I would like a little bit of feedback from the committee on how you want to handle some things that are moving forward here. We did get the survey back from the asbestos testing done on the school across the road. There is some minor asbestos that needs to be abated before we can demo the building. We're going to get that out for bids here. We actually sent it out to contractors to bid, and then we'll get the asbestos abated. We're also going to put out an RFP for demolition contractors for the demo of that building. Our intent is to have the bids back, to come back before the committee early in April. And one of the things that we're working to coordinate for the demo of that building is that the local fire department has requested that they could do some training in there before we took it down. It's not any fire that's going to be started. It's basically filling it with smoke and then dealing with training to be able to deal with their crews. And that'll be done before we take the demolition down, before we take the building down for demo. So one of the things that had come up at our building committee is how do we want to handle approval of contract recommendations. So what we're going to do is we're going to put multiple portions of the project out to bid at multiple times throughout the course of the project, and then we're going to bring all of the bids together. We'll take care of putting the bid documents out. We'll work with Paul in regards to publishing them and advertising for the bids. We'll have a pre-bid meeting for all the bidders, and then we'll have a bid day where we'll actually read the bids aloud. And then we'll go through and qualify the bids and then bring them back to you as the owner with recommendation in regards to who should be awarded in each category. Now, I've done it multiple ways with different counties. Sometimes it goes to a standing committee and then the standing committee will take it to the full board. Other times, the board has authorized that standing committee to award those bids as long as we stay within the project budget. So What would you, the county, like to do in regards to the approval of bids for the work? Would you like to assign it to a standing committee? Is it something you want me to bring it before you as the board? I'm fine with it either way. It's just a matter of, sometimes it's nicer if we have a standing committee and we need to have an additional meeting to award some bids rather than having a special county board meeting. But I guess I wanted to find out what would the board like to see and how would they see that handled?
It's not on the agenda right now.
Kurt, are we talking about dozens of bids?
Potentially, yep.
That would be a burden for the full board to try to figure out.
Mhm.
He's giving an update, and I think if people want to talk about the update that he's provided, so we can give him
I'm sorry, if I'm speaking on an item that's not on the agenda, just let me know.
Well, I don't know if we can actually vote on it because it's not
Okay.
on the agenda, but.
Okay, well, let me just tee it
I
up
could
for
bring
you
that
then.
up.
and-
John, you didn't hear that. I could bring it up at least. That
Yeah.
If we brought all these, we're talking about dozens and dozens of bids.
Yeah.
So if we brought it before the full board,
That would be-
every bid before the full board, I mean, that's a burden that I
No, no.
don't think the board wants to shoulder.
I think it was either property or building oversight, or I think we kind of assigned that building oversight to property because that's the way I remember it, but.
But building oversight isn't a standing committee.
No,
It's ad hoc.
the standing committee with the building is property, so.
Yeah, I would think it would either be property or exec finance. That's
Yeah.
what I typically see done at different boards, so.
Probably both.
You need feedback from the board. We could at
And-
least
and
talk
if-
about that.
If I'm asking you to do something that's off the agenda, just think about it, and then
Yeah.
next time we meet, we can deal with that. And I apologize if I'm muddying the waters by bringing it up, but that is something that we'll need to think about. The next item is the street. I do have a meeting tomorrow with, the city has engineering firm that's working on the design of Hobson Street. So we're actually going to be meeting with them tomorrow to have some preliminary discussions about the utilities, and then that will lead into the discussion about the, putting the document in place, the agreement, Rick, between the city and the county of how that transitions. So it's started, the process is underway, and we will get that information over to Rick here so we can get that legal document in place before we start anything with the street. One of the other things that I will want to do from a safety perspective when we do the demolition is we're going to want to put a fence around that entire block that's over there. So just so you know, before we start any demolition, we'll put a construction fence around there because I don't want people getting into the property there. And then when we do decide to do the street closure, then we'll put a fence across there and make that construction in that area. So just to kind of give you some idea of some things to expect over the next couple of months. And then we're going to need to talk about a groundbreaking and how do you want that ceremony to be handled. Our group typically takes care of putting that all together. And I typically will see the entire board there at the groundbreaking.
Gold hard hats?
Hard hats, absolutely, hard hats. Gold hard hats, oh, I want to say gold shovels. I don't know that I have any gold hard hats.
I gotta go back to your asbestos.
Yes.
Is it in the floor ceilings or?
I don't have the report with me, but the glazing in the exterior windows has some asbestos in it. There's also liners in some of the electrical fixtures that has some asbestos in it, and then there is some caulking. There is asbestos in other areas of the building, but it does not need to be removed because it's not friable. We're only removing the friable asbestos prior to the demo. We're anticipating it's going to be around $3,000 for the abatement prior to the demo, and then the rest of the asbestos will just go with the demolition contractor. We'll instruct them in the bid documents that they need to.
So you're all hooked up with the DNR then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, there's a permit that needs to be submitted to the DNR before any of that gets started, so, yep.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Ms. Nutter.
Thank you, Mr. Austin, or Chairman Austin. I'm just curious, when the demolition is done, I know you have no control over who the company that will do it, but is there a possibility that any of the material that is being demolished can be reused or recycled or?
What we do with the Let me address the first thing that maybe you're leading to, is that we are giving a window of opportunity, and I should have mentioned that we're going to give a window of opportunity before the demo contractor come in and does the work, that they can then reach out to Jeremy, or however you're going to do it with the county, that if they wanted to have some I can't even say that word. Memorabilia from the building, then the county staff would go in and take it out. We don't want citizens getting into that building and taking things out, but there could be a request, and then that will be done in advance. In regards to what we do with recycling of that, we do encourage recycling from the demo contractors, but we really leave it up to them in regards to what they do with that material. I did share with the committee this last week that I have seen some contractors that come in and they salvage every little screw and pipe fitting that's in there. What we encourage them to do, and what we're going to put in the bid documents, is that if you want to do that and salvage all of that, you're going to have to do it off-site so that it doesn't slow down our process, because I don't want a demo contractor sifting through screws and nails for a year. But we do encourage the recycling. So it's encouraged, it's just that we don't require it.
Okay, well, great. It would seem to me there's a lot of reusable material there, and just to see it.
Yep, what I've
wasted.
seen a lot of them do is they'll come in, they'll take the small air handling units or the condensers, that goes on one truckload, and then they'll either scrap that for some materials, and that's how they end up bidding it. They'll walk through and see what's in there for salvageable material, and then they'll recycle what they can. Yep. All right, other questions? I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Wallach.
I'm dumping a lot on you because I know you got a lot to get through. And
Mr. Wallach.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One thing that hasn't come up yet, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but there has been a driveway on the backside of that lot.
The alley?
Yes.
Yep.
Are you aware of that?
It is. That's actually your property, and it's
Yeah,
actually,
okay,
it's
so that can
actually
be just shut off, that will be closed.
during construction. We
How
will.
about after we're done?
Well, actually, that becomes, it's going to be the Sallyport Drive for the sheriff at the
Okay,
end.
okay. I was just-
That's really a traffic flow for the squads to go through there. It's not going to be a public thoroughfare, but it'll be for the squads that
Yeah,
go
I
through.
wasn't aware if you were aware of that
Yep.
driveway back there. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so groundbreaking, again, I'll probably bring that up when we meet next month. And if you're okay, I'll probably be at your next meetings every month just to kind of give you an update like this. So if you need something or you want something, let me know. But we can talk about the groundbreaking and establishing the date. The groundbreaking would take place after the demo. It'd be nice to get all of that out of there, and then we'll have a nice pile of dirt there with all of you smiling and gold shovels and your hard hats to be able to get your photo taken. And then the second to the last thing is the ODIP. Last month, I was here with Vance Forrest, and we talked about owner direct insurance program. Have you had some time to think about that? Do you have more questions for me? Or is there some semblance of discussion there for whether we want to go ODIP or not?
Wasn't Amy gonna work on that?
Didn't we vote on that? We didn't vote on that.
No,
huh?
we didn't, because it wasn't done.
We definitely
It's not
gotta
on
get
this time
it,
either,
gotta
but-
get it on the agenda.
Well, we gotta find out what committee. That's-
Just-
What was your question,
I
Paul?
thought it was, Amy was gonna be working on that.
I think it
Because
should
it's
just go to,
work now.
it should go to exec finance, because it isn't costing us anymore.
No,
Or property, either one.
it has nothing to do with your employees. It's only solely with the contractors that are performing work on the project. So there is no exposure, there's no risk, there's no additional issues from your perspective. The only benefit is that you could potentially see the dividend of a safe project. And on a project your size, it could be over 200 grand,
Take it now.
which is big money, in my opinion. Yeah.
I had some questions last time, Kurt, but they have all been answered. Mr. Forrest answered my questions, so
Okay.
I have no more concerns about it.
Okay.
The next committee to meet is probably more than likely it's gonna be exec finance. I think it should be put on the exec finance.
And we will need to make a decision at the next April meeting, just so that we can get that thing rolling with the state. Okay, and then the last thing, and then I will get out of your hair. We are working on the renovation phase. We intend to bring that before the committee in early April, and then bring it to you next month. Because then you can make the determination of who gets the the best real estate on the renovation portion. We've done our best to move some departments around. What we're attempting to do is to place departments that are dealing with clients that have mobility issues as close to the front door as possible, so that they're not having to travel as far from the parking lot. But we're also looking at how can we reuse as much of the existing facility with just doing an upgrade on finishes rather than just doing a complete gut. So it is a balancing act. I will tell you that the departments have been very flexible in regards to giving us their information and what they're looking for. We're going to present a couple of options to all the departments before we bring it to the committee. So you're going to have some feedback from them potentially at some of your standing committees of whether they like it or whether they don't like it. It's a work in progress. So, any questions? Sorry if that was quick. I know you've got a lot to do yet, but
Looks good. I don't see any more questions. Thanks, Kurt.
all right. See you next month.
Thanks, Kurt.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Resolutions.
Oh,
No, we got one missing.
no, that's where we are.
All right, resolutions. Rezone executive ag for the town of Hale.
Whereas Charles T. and Kathleen F. Halama, landowners petitioners, have requested a rezone of a parcel of land in the town of Hale for a parcel division. Whereas the rezone is on approximately 67.127 acres more or less. Whereas a public hearing was held pursuant to section 59.69 parentheses 5 of the Wisconsin statutes. Whereas the town of Hale supports the rezone request. Whereas the Environment and Land Use Committee moved to rezone this parcel from exclusive agriculture, EA, to rural residential, RR, and it appears that the zoning change request is appropriate under the circumstances. Now be it resolved that the county adopt the attached ordinance amending the zoning district boundaries as indicated. Introduced by Environment and Land Use Committee, George Brandt, Kurt Skoyen, Carol Bowick, Kathy Zeglin, Kellen Nelson, Charles Wallach, Randy Severson.
Motion by Mr. Brandt, second by Mr. Wallach. George, you want to explain it a little bit?
Yeah, we had the public hearing, and there was some support from the township. As part of the revised land use plan, the town of Hale, which is now, with the exception of some exclusive ag land, is now all zoned R8, which is basically makes agriculture conditional use in the town of Hale. The land use plan in the town of Hale, the revised, wants to rezone all of that R8 land to rural residential. So basically, the request for this rezone, inasmuch as the land is no longer in farmland preservation and there's a desire to cut out a lot with potential lots in the future, the rezone to rural residential is consistent with their revised land use plan.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Not? All those in favor?
Call the roll.
Call the roll.
I knew you were going to remember. That's the way to go.
Yeah. Speed it up.
Rick Nemitz. Douglas Winters. Sally Miller.
Yes.
Richard Seixas. Joe Feltes.
Yes.
George Brandt.
Yes.
Beth Killian.
Yes.
Randy Tollefson.
Yes.
Michelle Haynes. Michelle?
I can see she's
You're
there.
on mute.
Are you unmute? Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can,
John Austin?
Yes.
Chuck Wallach?
Yes.
Tim Zeglin?
Yes.
Dan Schreiner?
Yes.
Kellen Nelson?
Yes.
Jeannie Nutter?
yes.
Kurt Skoyen?
Yes.
Ron Johnson?
Yes.
17-0.
Another rezone in town of Trempealeau.
Whereas Patricia A. Creasel, landowner petitioner, has requested the rezone of a parcel of land in the town of Trempealeau for a partial split for a future land sale. Whereas this rezone is on approximately 37.82 acres more or less, and whereas public hearing was held pursuant to section 59.69 parentheses 5 of Wisconsin statutes, and whereas the town of Trempealeau supports the rezone request, and whereas the Environment and Land Use Committee moved to rezone this parcel from exclusive agriculture 2, EA2, to rural residential, RR, and it appears that the zoning change request is appropriate under the circumstances. Now be it resolved that the county adopt the attached ordinance amending the zoning district boundaries as indicated, introduced by Environment and Land Use Committee, George Brandt, Kurt Skoyan, Carol Bowick, Randy Severson, Charles Wallach, Kellen Nelson, Kathy Zeglin.
Motion by Skoyan,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Nelson. All right, go ahead, George.
We did have a public hearing related to this at our March meeting. The town of Trempealeau is unique in that it requires anybody coming to ask for a rezone to personally personally ask the surrounding neighbors for any written comments related to any concerns they might have. There were two issue a couple of neighbors had with the rezone, and the issues raised had to do with the 350-foot setback on the River Road, which the current house that's there that is going to be split off meets. The other had to do with the farmland preservation agreement, which is this property has been out of since 2008. And then the other had to do with the easement related to access to the rest of the land and whether it was going to be developed or what. The plans were, there were no plans for, Mrs. Kriesel said there were no plans for development other than the cutting off the current house that exists there, and the easement had been granted for access for agriculture to the remaining land. So the town was unanimously in favor of the rezone. There would be the possibility of 3 lots there because of the 4 lot per 40, it being less than 40 acres. So it passed in the committee.
Okay.
And we recommend the rezone.
Any other questions or comments? Not? I'll call the roll.
George Brandt,
Yes.
Beth Killian,
Yes.
Randy Tollefson, Michelle Haynes,
Yes.
John Austin,
Yeah.
Chuck Wallach, Tim Zeglin,
Yes.
Dan Schreiner,
Yes.
Kellen Nelson,
Yes.
Jeannie Nutter,
Yes.
Kurt Skoyan,
Yes.
Ron Johnson,
Yes.
Rick Nimitz, Doug Winters,
Yes.
Sally Miller,
Yes.
Richard Seisha, Joe Feltus.
Yes.
17-0. Okay.
Okay, another rezone in the town of Unity.
Whereas David W. Back and Ricky S. Back, landowner petitioners, have requested the rezone of a parcel of land in the town of Unity for a parcel division. Whereas the rezone is on approximately 4.29 acres more or less. Whereas a public hearing was held pursuant to section 59.69 parentheses 5 of the Wisconsin statutes. And whereas the town of Unity supports the rezone request. And whereas the Environment and Land Use Committee moved to rezone this parcel from exclusive agriculture 2, EA2, to primary ag, PA, and it appears that the zoning change request is appropriate under the circumstances. Now be it resolved that the county adopt the attached ordinance amending the zoning district boundaries as indicated, introduced by Environment and Land Use Committee, George Brandt, Kurt Skoyan, Carol Bowick, Kathy Zeglin, Kellen Nelson, Charles Wallach, Randy Severson. Who was that one?
Motion by Johnson, was that?
Wallach.
Oh, motion by Wallach,
Second.
second by Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is a slightly different version of the last 2 rezones. This is for a 1 lot, basically, as opposed to a larger parcel. We did hold a public hearing, again, at the March meeting. There was nobody who appeared with any concerns, either for or against. and the township had sent a letter of support. There's also, because it's required a CS, a certified survey map, that's been received at the Department of Land Management Office. And the committee supports the rezone.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, call the roll.
Tim Zeglin,
Yes.
Dan Schreiner,
Yep.
Kellen Nelson,
Yes.
Jeannie Nutter,
Yes.
Kurt Skoyen,
Yes.
Ron Johnson,
Yes.
Rick Nimitz, Douglas Winters,
Yes.
Sally Miller,
Yes.
Richard Seisha,
Yes.
Joe Feltes,
Yes.
George Brandt,
Yes.
Beth Killian,
Yes.
Randy Tollefson,
Yes.
Michelle Haynes,
Yes.
John Austin,
Yeah.
Chuck Wallach,
Yes.
17-0.
Yeah, Human Services. Exec Finance Committee, Human Services Vehicle Purchase.
Whereas the ADRC Transportation Program needs to replace a 2010 van with 147,375 miles to safely transport elderly and individuals with disabilities. Whereas the Human Services Board authorized staff to seek bids to replace the above-mentioned van in November 2020 and approved the bid selection in January 2021 for a Braun ADA-compliant van at a cost of $34,048.50 from Mobility Works. And whereas the 8521 Transportation Non-Lapsing Fund has a balance as of 12/31/2019 of $87,104.73, which will more than cover the cost of the new van. And whereas the Human Services fleet of staff cars is used to transport clients and staff at a rate lower than the county reimbursement rate and is therefore a more cost-effective use of resources. Whereas the Human Services request to replace two 2016 vehicles at the September 2020 Human Services Board meeting, which was approved. And whereas the Human Services Board approved bid selection in November 2020 for two 2021 Chevy Malibus from Nels Gunderson at a cost of $18,947 each. And whereas the Human Services Vehicle Non-Lapsing account had a balance of $49,853 on 12/31/2019, according to the audit report. Now be it resolved that the Trempealeau County Board of Supervisors approves the 2021 Human Services budget adjustment to transfer funds from these vehicle purchases from the corresponding non-lapsing account to the 2021 Human Services budget. Co-introduced by Human Services Board, Kurt Skoyen, Michelle Haynes, Sally Miller, Karen Sepek, Jeannie Nutter, Rick Nimitz, Dorjean Blaha, Diane Schrader. Executive Finance Committee, Chuck Wallach, Tim Zeglin, Richard Seisha, John Austin, George Brandt.
I move to approve. This is Jeannie.
Nutter.
Motion to approve by Ms. Nutter.
Second.
Second by Mr. Brandt. You want to speak up to the situation, Deb?
Sure. First of all, I want to say thank you for letting us defer our annual report to a subsequent meeting. We didn't know what the weather was, and we have a number of staff that were going to participate in that. And in lieu of the time, it worked out for everybody, I guess. So we are replacing a pretty old van. We really need to replace it, and there's no levy funds involved with this. The staff vehicles that we are replacing are 2016 vehicles that are moving close to 100,000 miles on those cars, and that's going to start to nickel and dime us. We've got the reserve account to be able to pay for this, so none of these transactions will take any levy. And again, keeping our vehicles safe for our staff to drive is really important, especially since many of these vehicles transport individuals we serve.
Debbie, what are you planning on doing with the old vehicles? Are they going on a fleet auction or are they being traded?
All the old vehicles go out on the county or on the state surplus website. I can't think of the proper name of it.
I think it's called Wisconsin Surplus.
Yeah.
So whatever you make on that will help on the purchase of the new
Yeah,
ones?
in fact, there's a fee that they charge, and so part of their bid is that they also pay that fee. So we don't pay any fees for that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Not? Call the roll.
Jeannie Nutter,
Yes.
Kurt Skoyen.
Yes.
Ron Johnson.
Yes.
Rick Nimitz.
Yes.
Douglas Winters.
Yes.
Sally Miller.
Yes.
Richard Seisha.
Yes.
Joe Feltes.
Yes.
George Brandt.
Yes.
Beth Killian.
Yes.
Randy Tollefson.
Yes.
Michelle Haynes.
Yes.
John Austin.
Yes.
Chuck Wallach.
Yes.
Tim Zeglin.
Yes.
Dan Schreiner.
Yes.
Kellen Nelson.
Yes.
17-0.
Next one came from Exec Finance and Property Committee. That's carryover funds from CAD mapping project.
Whereas the Trempealeau County Information Technology Department was unable to complete a key project in 2020 due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas the key requirements to implement the CAD mapping project in dispatch are now complete, and whereas the Information Technology Department will need to purchase the previously approved interface and maintenance services in 2021 for the CAD mapping interface. And whereas the approved amount from 2020 was and remains an estimated $17,825 to implement, now be it resolved that the Trempealeau County Board of Supervisors approves the carryover $17,825 from the IT 2020 budget account 101.51450.210 to the 2021 budget for technology upgrade in the dispatch mapping interface. Introduced by Property Committee, Chuck Wallach, Dan Schreiner, Tim Zeglin, Randy Tollefson. And Executive Finance Committee, Chuck Wallach, George Brandt, Tim Zeglin, John Austin, Richard Seisha.
Second.
Motion by Schreiner, seconded by Tellefson.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do a little explanation if
Okay.
that's needed. Tim Robertson brought this before both Exec Finance and Property Committee. The project was begun. It has something to, I don't know the details, but it has something to do with improving the capability of the dispatch office. It was begun and had to be put on hold because of the COVID situation, and IT just didn't have time to do it. And so that's why Mr. Robertson is asking to roll over the funds into the next budget. Otherwise, the money would go back to the general fund. So it was not completed because it just got moved down on the list of priorities, but it still needs to be done.
Okay. Did you have a comment there, Dan? You look like you had a comment. No?
Well, the original CAD...
Push your button.
The original CAD, computer-aided dispatch, in dispatch, came with an interface that mapping was supplied by Google Maps, and it became apparent in rapid fashion that the accuracy of Google Maps was lacking. So this will give us a much more accurate accounting of where these calls are coming from and where first responders need to be dispatched to. A real good idea.
Okay, sounds good. Want to call the roll?
Richard Seisha.
Yes.
Joe Feltes.
Yes.
George Brandt.
Yes.
Beth Killian.
Yes.
Randy Tollefson.
Yes.
Michelle Haynes.
Yes.
John Austin.
Yes.
Chuck Wallach.
Yes.
Tim Zeglin.
Yes.
Dan Schreiner.
Yes.
Kellen Nelson.
Yes.
Jeannie Nutter.
Yes.
Kurt Skoyen.
Yes.
Ron Johnson.
Yes.
Rick Nimitz. Douglas Winters.
Yes.
Sally Miller.
Yes.
17-0.
Okay, next item is Audit Committee, members' claims.
Whereas the Audit Committee has audited the following claims and recommend that they be allowed as follows. John Austin, $639.20. George Brandt, $664.24. Joe Feltes, $414.24. Michelle Haynes, $64. Ron Johnson, $335.12. Beth Killian, $50. Sally Miller, $50. Kellen Nelson, $0. Rick Nimitz, $134.72. Jeannie Nutter, $262.72. Richard Seisha, $237.36. Dan Schreiner, $250. Kurt Skoyan, $355.44. Randy Tullifson, $307.12. Chuck Wallach, $315.68. Douglas Winters, $83.60. Tim Zeglin, 0. Total per diem, $3,450. Expenses, $713.44. Grand total, $4,163.44. Now be it resolved that the claims be allowed as shown. Introduced by Audit Committee, John Austin, Randy Tullifson, Beth Killian.
Move for approval.
Motion by Johnson,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Skoyan.
Both in the back row.
If there's any discussion, call the roll.
Just, I got her, okay. Sally Miller,
Yes.
Richard Seisha, Joe Feltus,
Yes.
George Brandt,
Yes.
Beth Killian,
Yes.
Randy Tullifson,
Yeah.
Michelle Haynes,
Yes.
John Austin, John,
Oh, yes. I just saw the note passing around.
oh, John Austin said yes. Okay, Chuck Wallach,
Yes.
Tim Zeglin,
Yes.
Dan Schreiner,
Yes.
Kellen Nelson,
Yes.
Jeannie Nutter,
Yes.
Kurt Skoyan,
Yes.
Ron Johnson,
Yes.
Rick Nimitz, Douglas Winters.
Yes.
17-0. Okay,
Next on the agenda is appointment for the ADRC Advisory Committee. I got a letter from Deb Sukla here, Human Services Director, who's dated March 15th. It says, I'm writing to ask for the following 3 names to be appointed by you, County Board Chair, and request confirmation at the County Board as new members of the ADRC Advisory Council to replace the retiring members. The new members are to be Sherry Haynes, Ruth Gullicksrud, and Mary Fresh. You want to explain that?
Yeah, the ADRC advisory has not had a quorum in close to a year. Part of it is because, again, a lot of the members are the population that were most vulnerable to COVID, and meeting in person didn't work well, and a lot of them didn't have technology that worked well. So we are getting together, we're ready to have our meeting in April. We need a quorum of our committee, and we looked at our bylaws. We cannot have more than 12 members. And so we are replacing these 3. We still have 1 vacancy. There is 1 individual in the community I've reached out to. They've asked for some information. I just haven't gotten back to them yet. So we may come back with 1 more name next month, but this will put us at 11. I will say that the last name came to me from Beth Killian, so thank you very much for that. She talked to me last week. And so I think we're going to have a great group of people on this advisory committee. They've got a lot of work to do, particularly talking about opening up transportation programs and meal sites and all those kind of good things. They'll be busy this year. Thank you.
Okay, motion to approve.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Motion by Ms. Miller.
I think Joe did the second.
Joe did the second? Okay.
I second it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
There was a item on here, it seems how you're here, Ms. Miller, Local Emergency Government Planning Committee. I know you mentioned that you wanted to resign, but I'd like a list of, give me a list of who's on it now, and what did you say, it takes 2 county board members have to be?
Yeah, there's supposed to be two members, oops, 2 members of the county board on it.
So, anyway,
Right now, we just, if Sally resigns, we only have Dan Schreiner, so we have to have another county board. So if Sally wanted to stay on, she could.
Or,
Oh, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
or you,
What did you just say?
or you can give
Because
me a
again, I
list.
don't think that's going to happen.
Can you
No,
give me-
I have already resigned. We had a meeting on Wednesday, and I've been on the committee for 9 years. Schreiner is so much better at this than I am. Good leaders know when to step back and let somebody else do it better, and Schreiner's the guy. And I was appointed to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, and that is something I have a lot of background in, so I need to be on that committee and let Schreiner take the LEPC.
No, because her list is different than what I had, so.
Do you have a list of the members on it now? Because the list we have is not current.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, you have it?
I can get you that list.
Okay,
Then we'll put it on next month.
okay,
Okay.
thank you. Anything else? Committee reports.
2 county board members. Committee reports there, the February report was on your desk, but the rest was all mailed to you. So we got the sales tax and the general fund balances. If there's any questions, let me know.
Correspondence, a letter from the library, you got that?
Yep.
Okay.
This is from the Arcadia Public Library. We would like to acknowledge and thank you for the county appropriation check for the Arcadia Public Library received from Trumpealeau County. We wish to express our gratitude in helping support the library system. We also thank you for the 100% funding in county appropriations for the Trempealeau Public Libraries. It will help to better our services to our communities. Your funds will help support literacy and learning as well as aid people in changing their lives through reading and education. It will also help with the reading programs, technology, and other items needed for the libraries and their patrons. Thank you for making a difference, and thank you for being an important part of Winding River's library system. It is greatly appreciated. Sincerely, Jennifer Lisinski.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I wanted to comment on something. It's come to my attention that the various libraries in our county have been serving as an information and referral resource center for people who are homeless and have food insecurities, and really have become quite a source of information during times when people are having a hard time, especially more vulnerable populations. And so I just wanted to let you know that they are certainly rising up to the challenge and doing things we didn't even know they were doing. And I definitely felt like they earned the 100% reimbursement. They're really stepping up.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or nothing? Otherwise, instruct the, do you need a motion for that?
Yep.
Need a motion to instruct the clerk to pay mileage per diem?
So moved.
Motion by Stasia, seconded by
Winters.
Winters.
Right here, was yeah.
Call the roll.
It's what it is outside today, too, huh? Beth Killian.
Yes.
Randy Tollefson.
Yes.
Michelle Haynes.
Yes.
John Austin.
Yes.
Chuck Wallach. Tim Zeglin. Dan Schreiner.
Yes.
Kellen Nelson.
Yes.
Jeannie Nutter.
Yes.
Kurt Skoyen.
Yes.
Ron Johnson.
Yes.
Rick Nimitz.
Yes.
Douglas Winters. Sally Miller.
Yes.
Richard Seisha.
Yes.
Joe Feltus. George Brandt.
Yes.
17-0.
Okay, next meeting is April 20th at 10 a.m. It's a daytime meeting.
John, before you adjourn, there's something I'd like, is there any possibility, Rick, that we could get any updates on the land management department? Or,
That would be something that should be more appropriate for a closed session.
okay, I didn't mean it now, but
Oh, okay, yes.
I'm asking, could that be put on the next agenda? Because we're getting, I'm sure the rest of you are getting questions and questions about that, and we would like some information as to where we could go. Yes, I didn't want it tonight, but I did want it, is that something we could put on the next agenda?
Okay, anyway, next meeting is April 20th at 10 a.m. So just make note of it's a daytime meeting. With that, it's adjourned at 9:14.